Hello, good evening and welcome to Face the Nation. In the chaos that has engulfed the country over the past couple of months and the political drama that is unfolding much like a Greek tragedy, it's fair to say that the public's attention may not be focused where it needs to be. Are persons with vested interests carrying out nefarious deals in this climate of uncertainty? Our topic of discussion today is power and corruption crisis in the energy sector. And to discuss all this and more, we're joined by an eminent panel. Let me introduce them to you. First, Mr. Parakrama Jayasinghe, former president of the Bioenergy Association and also a celebrated mechanical engineer. We're also joined this evening by Mr. Lakmal Fernando. He's the secretary of the Solar Industry Association. And we're also joined by Mr. Salya Wickramasuriya, co-chair of the National Agenda Committee on Energy at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. He, of course, has an extensive background in the oil and gas exploration field and also as an upstream regulator. I'd like to start this evening's show with Mr. Parakrama Jayasinghe. Mr. Jayasinghe, in the field of alternative energy sources, you've been a proponent for biomass as an alternative energy source. Let me just ask you a question based on news reports that have come out over the past few days, specifically on this purported cabinet paper that proposes to establish 4 new coal power plants in the country. Does Sri Lanka need 4 new coal power plants?
The straight answer is no. It's very easy to answer that because when you talk about energy, actually you should talk about all forms of energy, not limited to electricity alone. But unfortunately in Sri Lanka that holds the highest attention. It is acceptable because electricity is the most preferred type of energy. But we must take a holistic look at it, what we need altogether. And also what you must realize is not only Sri Lanka, maybe the whole world has been trapped in what is called the fossil fuel blip. You know, this oil and coal and gas and all that things were unheard of few hundred years ago, not even that. And as the present findings are there, it won't be there after another maybe 100 years maximum. So, but we have been caught in that blip and finding it very difficult to get out of it. Unfortunately for us in Sri Lanka, so far we don't have any. The hope of there being some gas in Manna, but certainly no oil and coal. We have got ourselves trapped into that or very much more than we would expect without realizing that we have a lot of other alternate forms of energy which have been ignored so far. So it is time that we woke up because we cannot afford to on one side, and also now we know there are lots of other implications of impact on the environment and health and that sort of thing. And what affects us much more is our balance of payment, because we are depending on import of all those resources at the moment. So all these need to be considered when you decide what you are going to do. At least now, having burnt our fingers as it were, we should look at, okay, isn't there a different way of getting our energy? Nobody says that you do without. You really do need all the forms of energy, and we are what's considered energy poor nation, where per capita energy consumption is very low compared to even our neighbors. So they need to grow. With development, there will be demand for more and more energy. But where does it come from? That is the primary question.
Mr. Jayasinghe, immediately after the 2015 elections, the presidential and then the parliamentary elections and the establishment of this government under the duumvirate of President Maithripala Sirisena and Prime Minister Ranil Wickramasinghe, there was a lot of talk about the solar revolution and the vision for 2025 and the sustainable Sri Lanka vision for 2030, and this seemed to lay out what was going to be the government's energy policy for the next 5 years, and going in line with Sri Lanka's commitments at the Paris summit as well to combat climate change. This was, the mix was supposed to be very heavily geared towards renewables. But in the past 2 years or so, we've seen mixed messaging coming from the government, from the bureaucrats, and sometimes from those in the energy sector as well, with vested interests, you could say, on clean coal and highly efficient coal and etc., etc. As someone who works in the energy sector, as a lobbyist, as a proponent for alternative energy sources, specifically biomass, how do you see this confusion in policy?
Well, like you said, there are lots of talk about it. In fact, I happen to have brought a file which says blue-green economy. You see, Harita Viplava and Harita Arthika, that kind of...
Yeah, it's a blue-green budget as well.
Yeah, that's right. So, anyway, there was so much talk and there was so much hope given. And in a way, certain actions were taken which gave us some hope that we will be moving in the right direction. So in that respect, I would say that some actions, particularly when, I must say this very openly, when Minister Champika Ranawaka was in charge of power and energy, he put in a lot of effort to make this change. And you would remember that he came up with the proposal, what is called the 10-year development plan for a knowledge-based, energy development plan for a knowledge-based economy. Where he had a vision of being practically 100% indigenous energy by 2030. You see, if I remember the numbers, I think it was only 1% coal by 2030, accounting for the Norchole, which is already here.
Mr. Jayasinghe, I'll come back to you on this issue, because there are some very interesting, when you look at the establishment of our power and energy sector, specifically in the public sector, and the various different authorities that are there, that too is quite confusing. But I want to move to Mr. Lakmal Fernando, the Secretary of the Solar Industry Association. Mr. Fernando, from even before 2015, really, there was talk of the importance that solar was going to play in Sri Lanka's, in providing the electrification of the entire island. There was the introduction of net metering and etc. But now we're seeing steps that are being taken to remove these, let's say, benefits or privileges that were conferred towards renewable, well, solar energy. Given what has been said over the past few weeks, specifically around this proposal to eliminate net metering, how do you, as an industry group, how do you reconcile with this?
I would say it's, when you take the country's perspective, it's a very unwise move, because what we are saving is foreign currency, a large amount of foreign currency. And we are giving a sizable benefit to CEB by implementing solar. Now, so far we have done 200 megawatts of solar rooftops, and out of these 200 megawatts of solar rooftops, we have saved them close to 6.5 billion rupees every year.
But the CEB seems to disagree with that figure. The CEB seems to believe that, I'm not sure whose figures to go by, but the CEB seems to believe that net metering is actually causing them a loss.
I will very simplify, my answers. Now, this is the energy split in Sri Lanka. What you see here is coal, red, that is 30%, hydro 30%, oil 30%, other renewable sources 10%. So out of the other renewable sources 10%, solar accounts to almost next to 1%. So when you say 1%, if it's avoiding cost, whether we have done solar or not. If we have not done solar, what this energy would have come from? It would have come from oil, the obvious answer. So oil prices today, the kilowatt hour prices, is approximately 44 rupees overall. So 44 rupees as against what they pay for solar, 22 rupees. So if we didn't supply this 200 megawatts of solar to the grid, we would have purchased a unit cost at about, say, roughly 45 rupees. So that would have bled the country so many millions of dollars and also would have had a mega impact on the economy. So what we are saying is, here in this chart I am saying very clearly, now this is the 2018
Mr.
October.
Fernando, if you don't mind, for the benefit of our viewers, could you just point that
Right.
forward facing towards the camera? I'd like to see it as well.
Now this is 2018 CEB kilowatt hour cost. It is 18 rupees and 69 cents. And according to the Honourable Minister last week in the Parliament, he said it is now 23 rupees and 82 cents. So this is a cost differential of 5 rupees within less than 10 months. So 5 rupees it had risen. If we did not give solar 200 megawatts, this would have got, say, closer to something like 50 rupees. So what we are saying is, by doing 200 megawatts of solar, we have given a huge benefit to the CEB, huge benefit. I can show you statistically what kind of benefit that we have, given for CEB. It is actually 7.7 billion rupees. You can take this also in the camera.
The benefit from the solar industry towards the CEB
by doing solar as against purchasing this power elsewhere. So it's very clear, my numbers here, 7.7 billion we have saved to the CEB. If not for solar, we would have purchased other sources of energy, which is oil obviously. We don't have any other source. I don't think we have any decent power plant coming up for the next 3 years. Even if that is the case, even if it comes to operation, it's going to be providing only 300 megawatts capacity. So every year we are growing by about 200 megawatts in energy. So where is this additional energy going to come from? It's only emergency power. So we are only helping CEB to keep afloat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fernando. I'd now like to move to Mr. Salio Wickremesuriya. Mr. Wickremesuriya, in the backdrop of all of this happening in the energy sector, probably one of the most alarming developments that came to light from this controversial cabinet paper was the proposal to curtail the powers of the regulator, the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka, that is supposed to safeguard the public interest in matters of power and energy, and even when it comes to water supply. You've functioned as a regulator in the past. This proposal for the PUCSL to serve simply as a consumer protection authority or ombudsman, as per this cabinet paper, and to sort of give a whole load of discretionary power to the cabinet of ministers. How do you see this from the perspective of governance, of good governance?
I see that as one of the most regressive steps we have taken in the last few years. And I say that for good reason. The job of a regulator is to maintain equity between stakeholders. And typically, a regulator is the third point in a triangle where there's policy at one end, regulation in one corner, and operations in the other. Now, in this particular case, taking the power away from the regulator of the electricity sector and placing it in the hands of the cabinet of ministers is analogous to dissolving the TRC and taking the powers of the TRC and placing it in the cabinet of ministers, and letting the license holders operate in a free-for-all mode. And what we lose when we do that in any sector is we lose the protection that the regulator is meant to offer all stakeholders. And if you analyze who these stakeholders are, they are the general public. You mentioned public interest. They are the actual providers of that power or telecommunication services or whatever, which are the investors and the actual operators of the frequency or the power plants. And of course, the national interest, what is best for the country. So when steps like this are taken in a technical subject as complex as power generation, energy, oil and gas, telecoms, it's absolutely essential that the regulation is done free of any political bias, free of any personal or institutional agenda, and with a great deal of expertise. In fact, it is most often the case in other parts of the world that the regulators have more than the critical mass of knowledge of the operations that they are actually regulating. So I just, with all due respect to the incumbents, I just can't see that expertise sitting in the cabinet of ministers.
Mr. Wickramasuriya, one of the recommendations, and I'm quoting here from a report in the Sunday newspapers, is to, quote, amend the Sri Lanka Electricity Act in order to implement favorable regulatory mechanism in the country and to resolve the issues between the CEB and the PUCSL by clearly empowering the Cabinet of Minister for Economic and Technical Regulation and empowering the PUCSL for consumer protection and safety regulation in the electricity industry. Now, I've said this on the show a couple of times before, but could you imagine the chaos that would be visited on our financial markets, let's say, if the Colombo Stock Exchange decided that to hell with the Securities and Exchange Commission, we're going to run this show the way we want, the way we see fit?
That's another valid analogy, as is asking a basketball player to umpire a cricket match.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wickramasuriya. A basketball player to umpire a cricket match. Might help our chances moving forward, but whether the national interest will be safeguarded, whether the public interest will be safeguarded, and whether those genuinely engaging in business as electricity suppliers will be safeguarded. In the absence of a proper regulatory framework with the PUCSL as an independent body is definitely a very alarming prospect. Let me now move on to the question and answer session. We're joined by our journalists this evening. First on my left is Deshan Gonawala, and on my far left is Shehan Ranatunga. Gents, over to you.
I want to pose my first question to Mr. Wickramasuriya. Mr. Wickramasuriya, there is significant confusion when it comes to the policy front with regard to the energy sector. You see in Europe, especially in the more developed countries, there is a significant move towards sustainable energies, while we are regressing, if you were to put it bluntly. As somebody who has been involved in this sector, what do you think is the primary reason, if you were to point out one, for us to constantly push ourselves backwards as opposed to forwards?
Lack of a clear objective. If you don't have an objective that is a long-term objective on which you base your planning and your implementation, and you support that objective with a coherent policy, which, as Ms. Jasik correctly said, must be holistic, then there's chaos. Because the goalposts change with every minister, with every change of government, with every prime minister, with every president, the goalposts change. And unfortunately, with this particular cabinet paper, it comes at a time when Sri Lanka has made certain commitments to the outside world by way of the very mild commitments we signed up to in November 2015, COP21 in Paris. We're now at COP25 this year in Bonn. By which time I have to say that the commitments that were, how can you say, notionally made in December 2015 have been seen to be significantly insufficient. And in fact, the aspirational goal of 1.5%, 1.5 degrees average temperature rise is even seen to be not good enough. So in a context like this, we lose sight of our commitments to climate. We lose sight of our commitments to lending nations. People don't lend anymore for energy that is not clean and green. So the cost of financing will go up. And there's a lot of implications in turning away from commitments we have made externally.
Mr. Jayasinghe, do you think, given your background in the engineering sector as well, do you think that we are not making enough of an effort to put together the infrastructure necessary for us to move forward into more renewable energy? Or do you think there is somewhat of a systematic destruction of that process or the progress that could happen?
I think you should admit that there is a systematic destruction, because since 2015, all renewable energy projects have been blocked. You see, not a single project was approved by the CEB. You see, so they were citing a very minor flaw, I would say, loophole in the Electricity Act, and we have been struggling hard to get somebody to take this on and try and get it correct. It's a very minor this thing, and in fact, this change happened because of certain individuals only. The Electricity Act was amended in 2013, right? But from 2013 up to 2015, nobody paid too much attention for that, because obvious reason, anybody reading it would really understand that this is just a small mistake. You see, but the intent of the Act and the intent of the clause were very clear. But somebody, I don't want to go into the detail of that one, somebody came back to the head office and wanted to block this, because he thought this blockage of Sampur power plant, or cancellation of that one, was due to the renewable energy sector people, which is not true. It was due to essentially because of the environmental reasons, right? And from that point onwards, nothing was done. So it is very fortunate, I must say. In that light, the Surya Bala Sangramya was launched. So that was the only generation that happened from that time onwards. And as Lakpal said, about 200, 250 megawatts of power came. Absolutely nothing else came in. So only source of new generation came from Surya Bala Sangramya alone, you see. Very couple of small, maybe 10 megawatt level solar plants came up. Other than that, it's all rooftop systems, right?
Mr. Lakmal, to go straight into it, one of the biggest problems we have in this country when it comes to adapting to new things, or even going into big projects, large scale projects, is corruption. Do you think, or well, let's be honest, there is a notion that corruption plays a part in these big projects. Do you think when it comes to these large scale solar projects that are to take place, that corruption is a hindering factor? Is this an actual issue? And is this one of the reasons that the people are deprived of an opportunity to actually move towards renewable energy?
Now, if I answer your question in a small particles, you take the 650 odd applications that are pending at SCA and CEB level.
That's actually what I was going to get to next.
So
Yes.
we have 650 entrepreneurs who are willing to do 300 kilowatt to 5 megawatt systems regionally. So when you do these kind of projects, the entire economy will get a cash injection. And these monies are not going to go out of the country.
Correct.
These are going to circulate within the country. Whereas when you look at, say, 300 megawatt or 500 megawatt solar power plant in one location, for sure, a foreign investor will come and take a part of this cake. And that money is not going to stay here in Sri Lanka. This is my personal opinion. I'm a very nationalistic person. So this money is going to go out of Sri Lanka. I'll ask you a very small question. Now, you have a wife and a domestic worker in your house. You want to send your domestic worker home who is paid 25,000. So, for your wife to do the homework, and she is saying, I need 35,000. I don't work for 25,000, I need 35,000. What is your answer? Would you keep the domestic worker, or would you give that 35,000 rupees to your wife and get her to do the housework? It's the
I'd
same
probably do the
thing.
housework myself and help out with it.
It's the same thing, same principle. So we are trying to get outside people to come here and take our money out instead of local industries being promoted, and this money is going to retain in the country. So, as I said earlier, there are 650 odd applications pending, and given an opportunity, these projects can roll out very, very fast, very, very fast. Like Suryabala Sangramya, we have done 19,700 rooftops so far. And our original target was to do 1 million households by 2025. So in 2019, we have reached our number. It's 180 megawatts basically. We have reached 200. So it had proved that we have the capacity to do this, and the industry is ready for it, and people are ready for it. And by trying to remove net metering and net accounting, we are not only going to deprive our people of their rights, we are also going to, chase away the foreign donors. Like Mr. Vikramasuriya very correctly said, now whenever there is energy loan or something of the sort coming up, they always lend only for clean energy. Now recently in Manila, ADB conference, they have very clearly told every delegation, people whoever was in the forum, don't come with these kind of things, no more loans for Sri Lanka unless it is clean energy, because they have heard about this abolition of net metering and net accounting, and they are very, very angry about it.
One of the points that these authorities do bring about is the whole idea of clean coal. What do you think about clean coal?
There is no clean coal. Coal is coal.
There is no such animal.
There is no such animal. Not born yet.
What about high efficient coal? That's the way it's been written in the cabinet paper. Highly efficient coal.
I will show you a. Now this is a Bloomberg report, right? This is a Bloomberg report. By 2050, the entire world is going 50% renewable. 50%. If I show you a little bit of information about 2012 and 18, where are the people who have coal, how they have moved into renewable energy. Now this is 2012, Australia.
Could you turn the map in this way, please? Thanks.
2012, Australia. They had 5% green energy. 2018, they have 16%. If I show you the projections for 2030, you'll be surprised, it's 50%. Now this is the Bloomberg report I'm showing you. So, them having coal, they are saying no to coal. We are having enough sunlight, we are saying no to sunlight. So this is basically taking the rights of the general public away from it.
Mr. Fernando, that's probably because sunlight can't pay you commissions.
Exactly. Mr. Jayasinghe,
Shayan, yes.
just not so long ago, we remember very well there was a power crisis. It started off with a breakdown at Norachole, and then suddenly the country experienced an extended blackout at different times. Now fast forward to today. Just last week, the Ministry of Power and Renewable Energy kind of sounded a warning again, because it's saying there isn't enough rain in these catchment areas. Firstly, do you see, is there a chance of any power crisis again in the near future? Because we haven't seen much action being taken, apart from private power purchases.
One thing that's happening is, you see, the demand has not grown at the rate that they were predicting. So that there is a little bit of leeway in that one. But what you say it could happen, because if there are not enough rain, and particularly in that time, because Norachole never runs at a capacity. Most of the time it is right. Although the three plants are running, number one is always running at a very much lower capacity. So even if one of them breaks down, there are going to be a big shortage of power. Now, the answer to your question, if people do realize this one, and also these are the kind of warnings that PUCSL have been giving. I was looking at some of these things, even as far back as 2016 and 17, they were saying that, okay, these are the dangers, therefore make sure that you preserve your water and, do certain actions to prevent that kind of thing happening. But they were always ignored. Now, having seen that previous power cuts, not very far back, knowing that this year could be a dry year, relatively speaking, compared to last year. So this danger is definitely there. Now that is where people must realize the fastest way and the most beneficial way for Sri Lanka is to add more and more solar, which these people are ready to do at a drop of a hat, really. You see? So instead of doing that one, now of course they are looking at the means of doing it, like Nadim was saying, is for different reasons. You see, there are 2 barges due to come, all that is, and because also there is a story going now, that is supposed to be emergency power. So there's a story going saying that no, they are going to say that their emergency is permanent. so that
Mr. Jayasinghe, if you were to compare, for the benefit of the viewers, if you were to compare the cost of setting up a solar power plant and the cost of setting up a coal power plant,
yes,
what is more cost effective?
this is the change that happened over the last few years, a drastic change. I mean, if you go to Bloomberg, you will see the graphs, you know. Over the 5 years, solar costs came down by 80%. So similar thing is happening on batteries. So now that way, the affordability of solar became so much more. So and right now, there are reports saying that solar and wind is now more cheaper than even operating the coal power plants, let alone the establishment of that. So in America and all that, but they are closing down. Even that have gone to even to the extent of closing down gas power plants, because it's cheaper for you to go for solar and wind.
Mr. Wickramasuriya, if all these factors seem to be pointing in one direction, what do you think is holding us back?
Can I answer that question in a different manner?
Of course, of course.
I think lack of clarity of thought and opacity of government action to the public eye. Now let's take today. There's approximately 1/3 on the grid from thermal. There's approximately 1/3 from hydro and approximately 1/3 from coal during the day. Now the daytime peak is approaching the nighttime peak in magnitude, and very soon, according to the CB's own predictions, it will overtake the nighttime peak. So if the daytime peak is bigger than the nighttime peak, what's the most logical source of energy to supply that with? Something that is daylight dependent, solar. Now that's not happening. And so because now if you look at that mix, if you put on more solar, if you put in more solar, what would you be reducing? You'd be reducing hydro or you'd be reducing thermal. You have good reasons to reduce both. You reduce thermal because of the cost, particularly diesel fired and HFO fired thermal. You reduce hydro to conserve water for peaking time. So it's I think there are mind games being played with us as consumers about crises that are either real or imagined, and solutions that are very short term. They're based on cost and not economic value. None of these cabinet papers that I have seen has had anything to do with any objective whatsoever. No cost, no quality, no sustainability. There has been nothing. Even the current one, where I think Nadeem was referring to, with all these power plants, it's one report which captures 7,000 megawatts of wish list, a whole host of plants. Some purporting to want to sign the power purchase agreement within this year. I have no idea how they're possibly going to do that. Some of them to be actually implemented this year. So those are mind games being played with us.
Mr. Wickramasuriya, I'm reading an article that says that according to a study from a Perth-based think tank, it says that countries in South and Southeast Asia, they must end their reliance on coal power plants and switch to clean energy in order to meet pledges to curb climate change and tackle air pollution, etc. Is there a problem in this part of the world, particularly in Sri Lanka, where is it because the public doesn't understand or place value on things like climate change? Because after all, it seems as though the politician reacts to what the public thinks. So maybe more public pressure has to be placed for action to be taken. So maybe the problem is a lack of awareness or understanding of things like climate change. What do you think?
I think people don't understand the gravity of that situation. I spent all of my professional career finding oil and gas and bringing it out of the ground for people in different parts of the world. I now am committed to keeping as much of it in the ground as possible because of the impact on climate. We are already 1.1 degrees above the average pre-industrial temperature. Now, pre-industrial was from the 1800s. So we've actually gone up 1.1 to 1.2 degrees above that. The 1.5 mark is the mark that signifies potential catastrophic ecological collapse. So we are playing in a space of 0.3 degrees average temperature rise. So the more carbon we put into the atmosphere, the less chance we have of being able to live that out during our lifetime. So in fact, it's not just a matter of what is cleaner, it's also what we're doing to decarbonize and capture and sequester carbon. So the understanding of the impact of climate change is what has led people to ignore it. That's my personal feeling.
What about you, Mr.
Sorry, Shyan, we have to go in for a short commercial break. We will definitely continue this thread of the discussion when we return. But just to quantify some of the statements that were being made by the panel today, on the 15th of June, an article published in Forbes magazine quoting a study from the International Renewable Energy Agency notes that even without subsidies, renewables are increasingly the cheapest option. Among the findings in the IRENA, or International Renewable Energy Agency report, onshore wind and solar power are now frequently less expensive than any fossil fuel option without financial assistance. New solar and wind installations are increasingly undercut even the operating only costs of existing coal-fired plants. Low and falling technology costs are making renewable the competitive backbone of energy decarbonization, and cost forecasts for solar power and onshore wind continue to be revised as new data emerges, with renewables consistently beating earlier expectations. Something to ponder over during the break. Face the Nation will be right back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're discussing power and corruption crisis in Sri Lanka's energy sector. We'll start off this second round also with Mr. Parakrama Jayasinghe, the former president of the Bioenergy Association, and also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, a celebrated mechanical engineer. Mr. Jayasinghe, at an event last year, I think it was in October, you said that energy generation could contribute $6 billion to Sri Lanka's GDP. What did you mean by that?
Yes. Give me a minute before I answer that question to continue with what Salih was saying. In Sri Lanka, of course, people are not sensitive to climate change yet. Now, unfortunately, this is contributed to by our politicians and people saying that we are emitting just a little bit. It's not going to be significant. Unfortunately, climate does not recognize borders. You see, whatever happens, we are affected. We are being affected already now. So even if there's nothing else, we have a moral right to make our little bit contribution, for which we are well placed. So, but in Sri Lanka, we leaving all that aside, the impact of our obligations, global obligations and all that aside, just a plain economics and the pricing is what says that we should be going for renewables. Now, I have a chart here, the cost of generation on different plants in Sri Lanka, right? Solar is here, right, the red one. They say coal is various numbers, 10 rupees, 12 rupees, this and that. But the submission they made to PUCSL, I think last year or something, said 14 rupees without accounting for the capital cost, prepayment of capital. If you add that one, it comes to 19 rupees. Yeah, and absolutely no provision for the environmental cost. If you add that too, that will be more like 26 or 27 rupees. So, plain answer to this question is economically is the best thing to do. That's what Salih said. We must have economic costing, not just financial costing, where Noruchola gets all the benefits from the government, low price loans and all that sort of thing, and no environmental control. It's running without EPA at the moment. You see, without that one, say that's cheaper. Therefore, coal is the cheapest. That's the message that's been trotted out now. And also, I would like to add to that the other comment that Salih made. This is the daily generation chart. You see, like Salih said, well, of course, coal at the bottom, then oil from both CB and the IPPs, and after that one is the water, right? Now, isn't it very obvious that, like Salia said, that we should superimpose this one? This is a chart from Hambantara, a small solar plant. You see, most of the days is that. There will be a little bit of variation. So that, quite rightly, you can eliminate the use of oil. Coal plants can't be shut down that easily, so it might run the basic base load operation, but the water can be served, which is available for you to run during the peak hours, right? The moment you say that, they say, no, we can't do that one because we have to provide irrigation water, it's not in our control. But nobody tells you that Lakshapan system has no irrigation. Lakshapan is entirely in the control of the CEB. There are different reasons because they are ineptitude into this one and not wanting to explore how it can be done. You see, and also water is not something given all throughout the year to the farmers or to the paddy field, and this doesn't say that it has to be given during the day. You see, the same amount of water can be given any time of the day for about 2 weeks per season. So all this is, not telling the truth. I must say that is the whole problem, and that is why we need the PUCSL. That is the only source through which we get any kind of information. Before the PUCSL came into being, we had no way of getting to know anything about it. So at least
It's a completely opaque system.
Oh yes, completely opaque. You see. So I'm sorry I got myself.
No, I'll come back to you on that question, on that statement that you made last year on energy generation and adding $6 billion to GDP. But first, I'd like to move to Mr. Fernando next. Mr. Fernando, one of the consistent, let's say, excuses that are brought up by detractors of the potential of solar energy is that solar energy is not reliable. If there's cloud cover or rain or this thing, you'll have to go without power. What do you say to those detractors?
So it's a very simple, clear answer. We are not looking at, one 500 megawatt plant in one location. We are looking at 1 million plants, 1 million small plants in 1 million locations scattered all around the country. If there's a cloud cover here, yes, power is generated elsewhere. There is no problem because it's not as bad as all the people say. This is done world over. We have a super set of engineers at CEB. It is, I believe, their duty. In fact, we had a very, very good discussion in one of the forums a few months ago, and they accepted that 20% of energy requirement in Sri Lanka can be absorbed as is without any problem. So we are still at 1%. So we can go up to another 19% without doing any alterations to the system according to the CEB experts. So we are talking about another 19%. We are sitting on that, and I would like to tell you the very answer for this question that you made. Now, why we wanted to do 1 million 1 million rooftops is to answer that same problem. So it's scattered right around the country, and by cutting down net metering and net accounting, people say various things, but the authorities, they have discussed this point blank with us straight on. And their opinion is, no, we are going to stop it. And they tell us one thing, close boundaries, and go out and tell the public something else. So this will have to come out at some point.
Mr. Fernando, in an environment like that, how do you plan your business?
It has had a major impact over the last couple of months. Ever since this started, people are not buying, they are delaying, they are postponing, because it's so undecided where the country, which direction all these problems are moving. So they are delaying it. All our association members, they call us every day about the delays that is associated, and also the customers' minds have got completely spoilt by all these kinds of different adverse media publicity being given, and this has happened world over. Now, if you take Germany had the system for nearly 10 plus years, and they announced it last year, saying they are giving another 9 months. Initially they said 6 months, then they said 9 months. So whoever wants to have rooftop solar systems, you have to have it within the next 9 months. Then we are going to temporarily stop it. Not going to stop it, temporarily stop it. But Australia is a growing population. So they recently, earlier they had a system up to from 30% to 70% grant. Now they recently introduced 100% grant for solar rooftops. So we are not asking anything like that. Now after the 21st disaster in Sri Lanka, various industries were given different kinds of financial benefits to keep the industries afloat. But we have not asked for anything. What we are asking is, we are doing something good for the country. Let this system prevail until we reach the 1 million households. And it will have a huge financial benefit for the country from the capital accounts point of view. We can't just look at one singular
Mr.
account.
Fernando, is someone trying to kill the solar industry in Sri Lanka?
I think, when you say, I would take Parag's own explanation. Now there are coal plants. Do you think it will be done in Sri Lanka? I don't think so. So automatically our requirements will shoot up. So when it is shooting up, what is happening automatically? You will need different sources of energy, which I will show you in this chart, is going up by the day. Every year, if you look at 2016, 150 megawatts.
Could you hold that up a little bit? Sorry.
16, 150 megawatts at a cost of 16.8 billion. 17, 180 megawatts at a cost of 27.8 billion. 270 megawatts in 18. We believe it's around about, say, 41 billion according to the available statistics. And this year it has shot up to 720. This is going to be attributing to the CEB loss directly. Now see this chart.
That's private sector energy purchases.
Yes, this is emergency purchasing.
Emergency power.
So this is directly attributing to the CEB loss. You can see it here. 2017, 33 billion, they have purchased 27.8 billion of emergency power. 2018, 22.7 billion, 41.6 billion emergency power. This year,
22.7 billion was the CEB's loss. And the emergency
that's
power
right. Red line is the CEB's loss. Now this year, according to the minister last week in the parliament, he said it's going to be 100 million. So we are buying 101 million rupees worth of emergency power. So you can see where the problem is. And luckily for CEB, we have given them 7 billion injection. So it would have been 107 billion instead of 100 billion.
But doesn't the Public Utilities Commission have jurisdiction over power purchases?
No, they do not have any mandate.
On that note, Mr. Fernando, I'll switch to Mr. Vikramasuriya. We're hearing about power being purchased from barges and all these emergency power purchases that are being pushed through. Now, the Public Utilities Commission, as my understanding is, does have some control over the CEB's ability to purchase power, doesn't it?
As far as I'm aware, it has a lot of control. In other words, all PPAs signed need to be approved of by the PUCSL. But right now, I think it's a case of where there's chaos, there's opportunity, because the PUCSL is not fully constituted. It is missing 3 or 4 members and it doesn't have a full quorum. So there is technically a loophole to rush through something in a hurry because the regulator is actually not fully constituted, which I think is a very, very vulnerable and irresponsible position for a government to leave the sector in. However, having said that, yes, I think as Para also very correctly said, they are the oversight, they are the public's oversight, the means by which public can actually view what's inside any sector. And right now what's happening, if I may use an analogy, Nadeem, which is easy to explain, it's quite similar. What's happening right now with the solar revolution being choked, it's as if we are all being asked to switch off our VoIP, remove WhatsApp, remove Skype and go back to SMSs and IDD, just to keep the utility healthy. So is keeping the utility healthy the biggest economic driver, or is it improving the quality of life, lowering cost and giving people more flexibility? That's a choice the government has to make.
It doesn't appear to be keeping the utility healthy either.
It doesn't appear to be either, yes.
Mr. Vikramasuriya, how do we resolve this? How can you prevent the government from basically turning the PUCSL into a toothless, lumbering, well, almost useless organization?
For the last 1.5 years or more, my colleagues on the National Agenda Committee at the Chamber have been critically analyzing the industry in a constructive manner, critically but constructively. And it's been like peeling away the different layers of an onion. The more you peel away, the more you actually learn, and the more you see, and the more there is that needs to be corrected. So I think the first thing that really has to happen is policy needs to be laid out very clearly. Now, we've had various documents in the public domain before that purport to be energy policy, but I don't think any of them stands up to scrutiny at an international level in terms of a properly consultative processed, properly technically researched, and properly economically justified policy. So we have a wish list of things we'd like to do by an indeterminate date in the future. We have lists of things we'd like to accomplish, but when you don't have a score sheet or when you don't have music, it's hard to play a symphony. So what we really need to do is we need to get back to the table of drawing up a simple but robust policy which actually keeps climate at the forefront and not any other agenda. Cut down on emissions, decarbonize, reduce cost, increase quality, increase choice. That's where we need to start.
Let's move on to the Q&A round. Shehan, you want to start off on this round, or do we go with Deshan?
Deshan, go first.
Deshan.
Thank you, Nadim. I want to pose this question to Mr. Lakma. Mr. Lakma, now, something you were mentioning is about the power purchasing that has been taking place, the emergency power purchasing over the last few years, and how it has contributed to the loss that the CEB has incurred. Emergency power purchasing, the word emergency is key here. How is it that we have an emergency every single year?
Very good question. I think we should ask this question from the ministry and the CEB. I think now let's take the 2016 tendered 300 megawatt LNG plant. It has not seen the daylight still. It was supposed to be generating power by now. But this is the process that Sri Lanka always goes through when it comes to awarding a tender. And it was given the LOI a couple of weeks ago. But even if they can start constructions, say this year, let's say they are starting construction, it will take about, say, 2 to 2.5 years for them to start oil firing. Then the gas, we don't have a platform still. So we are looking at approximately about 3.5 years away from today. So your question...
Are there other benefits in emergency power purchasing for vested parties?
I think now no one knows what is the actual energy requirement. Now, I have personally written to CEB asking for the reservoir water levels to determine what kind of energy requirement that we have. But unfortunately, now it's more than 3 weeks gone. They still haven't they replied saying it's in the process. So these reports, we used to get it from the PUCSL website. These things were available. So then the authority that has the power to determine energy purchasing, emergency energy purchasing, can determine what kind of energy is required. In a similar forum, we asked some of the very senior people from the utility, what is the energy requirement? What is the emergency power requirement? It risen up from 100 megawatts to 500 megawatts within a span of few hours. So it's evident that what we are doing today is not with numbers. For example, now the most popular argument CEB brings in is they are paying 45 rupees for a kilowatt hour for a unit for solar energy suppliers. There is nowhere in the country such payment has been made. Now they are comparing this with a person, let's say you are using 300 plus kilowatt hours per month. So at that point you start paying 45 rupees per every unit that you consume. So at that point, simply in my opinion, utility is making excessive profits on you. That's one way of looking at it. If you have a possibility of providing the energy that you will need in a self-sufficient manner, they should allow that to happen. What they are trying to do right now is to remove this. So we ask a very simple question. Tell us what is the number that you have on these 300 plus kilowatt hours consuming customers remaining, because we have already converted 19,000 odd customers. So few years ago it was 20,000. Now they say it is 40,000. So we are looking at another 20,000 more people to have the similar benefit.
Right.
It is your cost, what you are trying to finance by your own and generating your own energy. So that has to be allowed. If not, it's basically they are violating the rights of you and many others in this country to have power at a reasonably accepted price.
Mr. Jasing, on a structural level, you see even in countries like the United Kingdom, people have multiple options when it comes to who they want to purchase their power from. In terms of actually defeating the whole energy mafia and also improving the competitiveness of prices, how important is it that customers are given choices or the right to make a choice when it comes to who they buy their power from?
Now, actually, our primary problem is because of this monopoly. You see, we are not allowed to generate electricity on your own. Whatever you generate, you can only sell to the CEB. You can't even sell it to a neighbor. Now, under that kind of situation is where the PUCSL plays such a huge role. Now, remember, CEB is a public-owned entity, and we are the biggest, the one major shareholder. So, but we are being deprived of having any say in the matter at all. You see, when the PUCSL came into being, there was some degree of control. And to answer the earlier question you raised, till 2018 April, CEB was providing the data to PUCSL, and like I mentioned, there are reports in their website in 2016 and 17 I saw. In about January or so, when always the emergency is coming up because of the dry weather, they said do these things, right, in time, so that you can make sure you avert an emergency situation you have to buy. So we did not buy that much. Like Lakmal said, we didn't have to buy such a lot of it on those days. We didn't need to do that one because there were data was available, their analysis was done. Now, since April 2018, CEB is not providing that. Now, if that was done by any other, say somebody from the TRC, some of the telecom companies, his license would have been withdrawn. There is no question about it, because regulators, this thing is not abided by them. Simple as that. So that doesn't happen in this. You see, there is nobody to say that. How can you not provide? The Act says very clearly, you see, the regulators' orders have to be followed. There is no question about it. But this is Sri Lanka, you know, country like no other. So that is what is happening. So to answer your question, in that kind of situation, without any data, you are in completely cuckoo land, you know, what is happening.
So Mr. Wickramasuriya, on this, on the regulator not being followed, or the orders of the regulator not being followed, we know that the CEB is supposed to develop this least cost long-term generation expansion plan with their planned power plants and how they're basically going to meet the energy demands over the long term. Now, we know that the CEB developed a least cost long-term generation expansion plan, submitted it to the Public Utilities Commission, which then proceeded to have consultations with experts and the public on this issue, and made amendments and said this is what you have to fulfill. And the CEB then refuses. In your experience as a regulator, is this a unique situation? Because I think when they talk about the issue between the CEB and the regulator, I think this is what they're sort of referring to, is that they're at loggerheads. Have you ever been in that kind of a situation where the entity that you are regulating is basically just not listening to you?
I have not, but as Parag correctly said, it isn't a matter for discussion. If it is legislated, it is in law, it's not a dispute.
It's not, you're breaking the law.
You are breaking the law. So it's a matter of who has the stronger backbone, I guess, in terms of standing up or backing down, because ultimately you can't come to blows. Ultimately, the regulator needs to step in and pull the plug. Now, if that happens, the threat we face in Sri Lanka is the fact that there'll be all sorts of disruptions to our creature comforts. So it's a policy matter for
Do you
a
feel that
government
we have
to take
this
up.
problem because while the PUCSL had some level of control, that it was not, that the PUCSL should have been empowered to take punitive actions against persons within the CEB who were basically sabotaging the regulator? Do you think that the Public Utilities Commission should have had the power to take some form of punitive action?
Well, they do already by law, but the point is there's only one entity here. So what kind of punitive action can you take with a monolithic provider? The value of a regulator is actually when you have multiple providers, and that leads us to one of the questions asked by the journalists there.
Well, not necessarily against the CEB itself, but the individuals within the CEB who are refusing to carry this out.
I don't know enough about the issues to answer that question, but obviously if such people were identifiable, then there are processes within government, AR and FR, to hold them accountable. But other than that, the utilities' statutory responsibility should be exercised. It's not an option.
In the US, they have now published information to say that the reports say that US power plants can produce more energy from clean sources than coal for the first time in history, according to the latest data. It's overtaken the coal industry. Actually, I would like to come back to what I was going to ask you earlier, Mr. Fernando. The problem once again is, let's face it, the people or rather politicians respond to votes, and you have elections coming around the corner. But if they stand on a platform and promise clean energy, fulfilling issues with regard to climate change, they don't believe that they'll win votes. So hence the actions taken are more about winning votes. Do you see a problem in this sense, which is why Sri Lanka is in this situation to start with?
I think what they are doing right now is creating them more problems. Because you are depriving the rights of a person to have reasonably acceptable energy cost. So doing that, I think they are doing a greater damage than coming into a platform and saying, about renewable energy and various other things. Because they say something in closed doors and something completely different when they come out. So you will never know what time these few lines will go into the cabinet, because cabinet of ministers are very, very busy. I'm sure they give due attention to the cabinet papers when they sign, but things can go wrong. So at that point, like what happened a few months ago in one of the regions of CEB, a circular will all of a sudden move in, and they will stop everything. It happened, and we had to take corrective measures. We had to go through series of discussions to get that rectified, and it was illegal. Now they will legalize it. So they will legalize it and bring it in a proper manner. We are bringing down the entire rooftop industry, because net metering, net accounting is the common man's product, whereas net plus is for larger roofs. So they are willing to go ahead with the larger roofs, but not the net metering and net accounting. This is what we have been told over and over for the last 3 months by the authorities. So if these two systems brought down, labor force of close to 10,000 people who have started working in this trade over the last 4.5, 5 years, and about 19,700 customers who are already within the system will have to suffer. Because if these 245 companies closes down, because of any of these unjustifiable acts that the government is going to take, none of these 20,000 people, 19,700 people are going to have a service provider. This is a long-term product. This is, a serious decision than buying a car, because you are going to have a system on top of your roof for 25 years. So this system will have to be serviced by the same service provider for over 25 years, because that is where the warranties and guarantees, everything comes into play. So if the industry crashes, like some time ago, a couple of decades ago, there will be 20,000 customers without a service provider. So there is a greater danger. So these things will have to be, noticed and identified by people in the parliament.
Mr. Fernando, don't you think that they've already noticed it and they already know it?
Yes. Now we have been in a circle of
so
discussions.
they know what the repercussions will be. I mean, the minister knows, the Power Energy Secretary knows. I find it hard to believe that the other ministers who've sort of approved this or who are moving ahead with this, that they don't know. I'm sure that there are several MPs who already know. So if they know, does that make it deliberate? I'm asking you whether they're deliberately trying to kill your industry.
I can't say no to that, because we have educated most of the ministers in the cabinet, the key decision makers, and they have spoken to the ministry, they have spoken to the minister, including the president. So it's been very, very clearly told. But the ministry level, they are very adamant that they are going to stop net metering and net accounting. That's exactly what Mr. Ravi Karunayaka, the Honourable Minister, said in the Parliament the other day. He first said that, yes, we are not going to abolish net metering and net accounting, and at the tail of his speech he said, we are going to bring in only one system. What does it mean? Right now we have three systems, and he's reiterating what he has been telling us for the last 3 months. They are going to scrap net metering and net plus. Our argument is, don't do that. If you do that, you are leaving 30,000 households unattended. That's about 120,000 people. This is a serious problem. This is a serious political problem. 120,000 people unattended means that's going to run into a big, big chaos.
But Mr. Jayasinghe, don't you agree that, scrapping the net metering and net accounting will help them to plan better for the emergency power purchase?
That's a good way of putting it, I think. I think if you look at it seriously, that is maybe the reason why this is being scrapped. Because, like I said, only solar rooftop provided some kind of energy over the last few years. So when that is also taken out, well, where do you go?
No, I'm trying to find a bona fide, logical, rational reasoning for the decisions that are being made. But, logic dictates that the reason cannot be bona fide, that it has to be with negative, mala fides.
Yeah,
negative.
the reason that is given, or the argument that is given, is that they are losing their top-end customers. You see, that because they are, we are going to be 180, you pay 32 rupees and then 45 rupees. But what you must remember is, even those people, say, consuming 350 units, the first 180 units, they get at the lower prices, starting from 785, 10 rupees and that kind of thing. So CEB is actually selling that amount of energy below cost. So the net effect is very, very much smaller than what they try to make out. To start with, they don't know how many there are, right? And we have, like we were looking at this one, I don't think it will be even 1 billion if you put the whole lot together. But we have saved them 7 billion on the other side. So it's the net. You can't look at this one and not forget the other part of it. And also, to answer your question about is it to do with votes and all that, there's a serious deception that has been there. Minister continually says, I will not allow the consumer tariffs to be increased all the time, you see. But in the same speech, he says, okay, CEB is going to lose 100 billion this year. Where does that 100 billion come from? All
Treasury guarantees.
Huh?
Treasury guarantees.
So
basically, well.
So in effect, if you divide that 100 billion by the number of gigawatt hours, you will add at least 7 rupees per unit, which all of us will be paying. It does not come in your bill. But that is the money that should have been gone for something else if they are running the system properly and they are not having a losses. So we are offering them a way of reducing the cost of generation because.
But Mr. Wickramasuriya, there is a collective responsibility here, isn't there? I mean, we can, as much as you say, okay, this specific line minister is responsible for this and therefore this thing. I mean, at the end of the day, like we were saying, I mean, when the CEB makes a 100 billion loss, that loss is covered up through treasury guarantees, which are given by the finance ministry, which means that the finance minister is also in the loop. In fact, the finance minister is one of the people who has signed off on this most recent cabinet paper, and the prime minister and the minister for development strategies. There is collective responsibility here.
But doesn't it sound wrong to you? How many people are there in the CEB and how many people are there in the population of Sri Lanka? All of these decisions seem to me to be based on the utility rather than the consumer. So it's a little lopsided in my opinion. It's all about the utility and it's not about the consumers, whether they're the small consumers or the big consumers. So have I got something horribly wrong? Are we living to keep the utility in business? Is that the impression? Because that's the impression I have. I also want to make a couple of small clarifications, if I may. The emergency power is defined actually in the Act, and it is not. It does not include failure to plan or failure to implement. Emergency power only has two classifications under which it can be made emergency power. One is catastrophic power plant failure, or the other one is significant natural disaster. Now, neither of those is currently operative. So the actual procurement of emergency power in current situation is not...
is in violation of the law.
Is in violation of the law. Depending on your interpretation, as Para correctly said, I mean, the failure of Norwich-Leh, there's a flue gas desulfurizer and electrostatic precipitators are here and there not working, but they're not catastrophic failures.
Well, I mean, catastrophes are supposed to be few and major incidents that happen rarely.
Well,
I mean, if it's happening all the time, you can't really call it.
There's a further irony that we are all missing here, is that in squeezing and squeezing and squeezing on the price that we pay for free energy, we are actually subsidizing fossil fuel. And that's a morally very difficult position to defend. We're not paying.
It's tragic. Deshan, Shan, any final questions before we go in for the last break? No? Thank you. All right, on that note, let's go in for a short commercial break, actually. Catastrophic emergency power, I think the definition in the Act, I'm sure you all will agree, tallies also with the definition in the dictionary. On that note, we go in for our final break. When we come back, the last round. Welcome back to the program. It's the final round of Face the Nation. We've had a very interesting discussion around the topic of power and corruption crisis in Sri Lanka's energy sector. Let's now move to the final round. Gentlemen, we have 2 minutes each in this round. Mr. Sali Wickramasuriya, co-chair of the National Agenda Committee on Energy at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to start this final round off with you. The National Agenda Committee on Energy at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, very briefly in a nutshell, can you, given everything that we've been discussing so far on this situation that, or manufactured situation that we're facing in the energy sector, what kind of work will the Chamber be doing to sort of put a stop to this, basically?
The Chamber expresses itself through the NAC report, which is, as I mentioned in the break, in its final stages of review. It will be finalized within the next few days and then published according to their standard procedure. The Chamber, the committee itself is a multi-stakeholder committee containing representatives from all of the industries and users, not just the producers. And it has reached its conclusions by conducting a series of interviews, both of local players as well as people from overseas on matters of governance, matters of planning, matters of technology. So it's taken us a long time to get this report together. But the report will be the expression of the Chamber's views on matters that need to be addressed in the energy sector. It has short-term recommendations, which are, if you like, the low-hanging fruit, and it has medium-term recommendations, which may take a little bit more time to accomplish.
Run us through what some of these recommendations would be like. What kind of solutions would we be seeing coming from a report like the NAC report?
Well, let's start with accountability. What kind of KPIs do the utilities run to? What kind of standards of service are they expected to deliver? What kind of financial transparency are the public permitted to see, if you like? There's a whole number of things. I won't preempt the report by giving you the recommendations now, if I may, Nadeem, but it will be public in a fairly short time, and it addresses even the biomass, the horrible shortage of biomass plants in the planning process. I think it's only 100 megawatts over 20 years. So we really are, we're proposing some radical shift of direction.
And just finally, before I move on to Mr. Fernando, what will it take to ensure that it's not just another report and that those recommendations are then implemented?
A strong regulator, competition amongst the utility, and clear policy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saleh Wickramasuriya. A strong regulator, competition among the utility, and the final point was?
Distribution and transmission.
Generation, distribution, and transmission. Mr. Fernando, in the previous round when I asked you, is someone trying to kill the solar industry in Sri Lanka, you said you can't say no. But I'm not sure whether you know who is trying to kill you.
It has
not you, but
it has been
but
a
the
debate.
industry.
It has been a debate going on for years on what solar can give and what solar can't. But now it's proven world over, solar can be a substitute energy source for any climatic environment. We have seen it in very cold countries and in the Mediterranean countries and everywhere. So now we have no question that it's proven that solar can be used anywhere. So to answer your question, whether somebody wants to kill, you're putting me in a very difficult situation here, but I should tell you why these kind of ideas been floated. We have proved them over and over. Bringing in solar is only going to do good to CEB financially, not any damage. I'll show you a little chart. Now this is the energy mix what we have here. Major hydro.
Mr. Fernando, again, can you just turn the
Major hydro, we are generating around about 10 plus rupees. Then coal, we are generating around about 12 rupees. This is not taking the capex into the equation. And these are known numbers. Other renewables, 21 plus percentile. And it is leaving us to arrive at our own number for oil-based energy. Now this is costing us 44 plus rupees. For solar, they are paying only 22 rupees for the first 7 years, fixed price in rupees. And the remaining 13 rupees of a 20-year contract, they are paying only 15 rupees and 50 cents. The first scenario, we are saving CEB 29 plus rupees. The second scenario, the second 13 years, we are saving CEB 37.5 rupees per every kilowatt hour that we inject to the grid. So we should ask this question, why not? They come out with various excuses. I think personally, they have not got this completely digested. We have tried doing this. in certain forums, yes, CEB had been very, very favorable. But even the reports that has gone through to a senior level had been thrown out. So we know CEB engineers, they are very intelligent and they produce right kind of reports and they try to retain this, but certain people are trying to throw this out of the window. By showing this, it was very evident we are only saving CEB money, we are not draining them. And on the other hand, we are saving much needed forex drainage, we are avoiding it because we don't print dollars in this country. We only print rupees and we are paying for fossil fuel in dollars. Every dollar that we pay out for every kilowatt, every kilo of coal that we import, every liter of crude oil, everything. We are paying through the hard-earned money from our housemates, drivers, and various other people who have gone to Middle East and sweated their life out. So this has to be stopped. This has to be done at a very high level, president's level, prime minister's level, and the cabinet of ministers level. This has to be addressed at that level. This cannot be stopped anywhere beyond that.
But they have addressed it, Mr. Fernando, with their cabinet paper.
No.
That was the way they addressed it.
That cabinet paper has not gone through still. If we,
it's been signed by
if
4
we were
ministers.
kept silent, it would have gone through by now. I'm talking particularly about stopping net metering and net accounting. That has not gone through still. But I have my, severe doubts at any moment that can move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lakmal Fernando, Secretary of the Solar Industry Association. And finally, we come to Mr. Parakrama Singh, former president of the Bioenergy Association and also a mechanical engineer by profession. Mr. Jayasinghe, once again come back to that question that I posed to you earlier. You said that energy generation can contribute 6 billion, billion with a B, US dollars to Sri Lanka's GDP. Very quickly, in 2 minutes, what did you mean by that?
I think Lakmal answered that partly. This is the picture I have been showing all the time, because we collect every cent, even for, I'm not talking about electricity alone, I'm talking about energy in total. You see, little bit of kerosene that you use in a small hut also means money that we are collecting and sending it out to the country. You see, it used to be 6 billion, but fortunately oil prices dropped to some extent, so therefore now it's at, I think, more like, and also the rupee change, so in dollar terms it might be more like 4 billion now. It is going to change with the trouble in Middle East, is going to change back again. Now, what we are saying is, we don't have to do any of those things. All that energy can be generated here by ourselves in Sri Lanka, you see. And of course, when we did this analysis, we were looking mostly at bioenergy, because few years ago, solar was still too expensive. It was not an option. That has changed completely over the last couple of years. Now, solar has become so cheap in that sense, and it is so easy to use. And they are, like we have already done, 20,000 investors are coming to that plan. Whereas for biomass and all that, you can't do it at that scale. It has to be a certain scale. So you need fewer number of places, and there are a lot more capital is required. But the important thing is, solar has no fuel cost, but there is a lot of people who go into the business, and you do the same saving anyway, right? But in case of biomass, to answer the question you raised earlier, we are pumping back money into the people. You see, every supplier of fuel wood has a way of earning a lot of money actually. We say every megawatt of Denro will pump in at least 25 million rupees to the rural economy, you see. Now, of course, we have been trying hard to do that one. Like I told you earlier, it has been blocked 100% for the last 3-4 years, but fortunately, at least rooftop solar we managed to carry on. So this is the answer to you. You see how it is. And it brings me back also to what I said right at the beginning. We can't be looking at electricity alone. You see, we hardly say anything about the transport sector. Transport sector consumes huge amount of foreign exchange and fossil fuel. So other countries in the world are already looking at total electric transport. You see, even in England, Now, England definitely is saying that by 2025 they will not use any more coal, and they also want to make sure that even India says that by 2025 or even earlier, all public transport will be electric.
Well, most of India's metro trains are already.
Yeah, that's true. That's already. You see, so we have a future. We have an electric future, and I'm proud to say that I'm running electric car. You see, and I have solar panel on top, so I'll be using entirely solar energy for both for electricity as well as for my transport. That can happen to anywhere. And also, it was mentioned, this is the only country where they impose a huge tax on the electric vehicles. You see, when it was being picked up. So we have to look at the totality of it. So, like I said, I don't know how they are thinking about it. They are losing voters, but only way they try to prevent that one is giving this deception that, okay, we are giving you cheap power, your bill will not be increased, whatever happens, that sort of this thing. So unfortunately, we are unable to get this message across to the people. You see, we are very thankful for you for inviting us here. Very difficult to get this kind of thing even published in a single paper. You see, English papers of course do that, but we can't reach the people because it's very difficult to get these messages across. We have to be truthful. Now that is where things like policy comes in. You see, in 2007 we published what is called energy policy, but it was electricity policy. You see, and it was formulated by a few people without any kind of consultation. They promised to do new amendments and never done. You see, but we have to have a national energy policy, not a electricity policy. Then all these things will come together. Then the question you ask is, who are the ministers who will be involved? You see, it is I know, futile to have a Ministry of Power and Energy who look at only electricity. Few years, for a short periods of time, we had electricity and petroleum together. Now, that must happen because we need an energy ministry, not a power and energy ministry.
But then you'll have less ministers,
yeah.
So that might not work out either. Thank you very much, Mr. Parakrama Jayasinghe. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to come on the show today to discuss this very timely and important subject, as you probably correctly mentioned, is not being given enough attention in the public domain at present. Thank you also to Mr. Lakmal Fernando, the Secretary of the Solar Industry Association. I hope that we can, well, I suppose as long as the sun keeps shining, there is still hope for the Solar Industry Association. And also thank you very much to Mr. Saleh Wickramasuriya, co-chair. I look forward to reading the report of the National Agenda Committee on Energy at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure there will be some very pertinent recommendations in that report. Thank you also to Deshang Gonawala and Shehan Ranatunga. To the viewers at home, well, there's not much really to add to it. Most of our viewers would already have heard this in the international media, online. It's happening globally. The shift to renewables is happening, and it's happening at an increasingly rapid rate. But our government is planning 4 new coal power plants. We don't have any coal either. Well, no major deposits that are known. So there's only one question that you can ask, I suppose, in the end. If only the sun could pay commissions and kickbacks. Good night and